Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this week's Fake Accents Unite. I'm joined, as always, apart from last week and the occasional fracas here and there, by the ever-present Britisher. Good evening,
Yes, and
sir.
also in the last 30 seconds, I somehow managed to hit the wrong button and out I went just
Oh,
just as you were going online.
did
Yes.
you eject yourself from the call? I did switch over, obviously, to Google Hangouts to start the call, and I did see you just run. And I thought, oh, really? Have I offended him that badly before the call's even begun? Uh, obviously everyone else couldn't hear, but we were talking about the British's Day, how he's been over to Buckingham Palace, Windsor Castle, and the like. He's been advising Meghan and Harry on what to name their child.
I was advising Her Majesty on
Oh,
her
yes,
Christmas address,
that was correct.
and
Yes.
I was taking that occasion to basically ask Her Majesty to please have a word with Meghan to leave me alone, because I don't want any doings with feminists.
No, not only feminists, but colonial feminists at that. And you can't be doing with that one. Oh dear. Let's see. Who have we got turned up today? Liberal Zardos, Welsh and Content. Rubber is in the chat. Is it a rubber or ruber?
So it's
I'm
definitely,
gonna,
it has to be rubber. I'm sorry.
that's what I thought, just from a grammatical.
All the more given that the academic agent insists on calling him Ruber, I think we can agree it must be rubber.
I mean, the only thing, just I suppose the academic agent is getting ruber from the fact that if you put an R and a B on the end of his name, then you get rhubarb. But
Well, there is that, yes, but then at the same time, one would also have to conclude that it would have to be written in the same way as Aruba, as in Aruba rum, and it isn't written anything like that. Hence, it's
no,
rubber, and that's
hence it's rubber. Yes, I've always called him rubber, and so he will always continue to be rubber. And he was on your stream first, I believe. He was on the quiz, wasn't he? So
yes.
he has to be.
I kind of bumped into him on Twitter and inquired whether he wanted to come on, and we went from there. Yes, and of course that for basically one day when he is kind of rich and famous, I will be able to give some kind of embittered interview on the BBC.
Oh, I'm sure.
Which I'll be able to say how I started him on his climb to fame, and he has been slighting me ever since. Yes.
No doubt you'll be accusing him of being leftist propaganda, and sort of cucking to the status quo.
I don't know whether he is going to get his channel monetized.
Well, he really ought to pick up a few more subscribers for that. And on that note, if anyone's watching who isn't subscribed to Rubber, it's worth going and checking his channel out. He makes some good content. But yes, have you?
Yes, I like it how you just drew a veil over the monetization question there.
Of course, yes. I did. Of course, I did.
We all know where the communists lurk.
No, yes. Shush you. We all know that you produce the most. Was it like un-PC damaging sort of social discourse on YouTube? You're an incredibly harmful individual who seems to be all over the place. I mean, you've never produced anything consistent for your channel, of course.
Oh yes, yeah, no, I am completely and utterly. I am the dangerous, edgy subversive. Who under no circumstances do they want to monetize, as opposed to those people who are, sort of, tangentially slightly removed from full SJW dumb.
Oh, you really need to. I think you're too wholesome for YouTube, man. Like, they're doing you a favor. That's what it is. Good grief.
That's before we even start talking about Count Dankula's checkmark on Twitter.
Has he managed a checkmark now? I think.
Oh, he's had a checkmark for a long time now. Yes,
purely through controversy, no doubt. Like, they can't help but acknowledge his existence as opposed to others. Although I am surprised he's not been they haven't ousted him from Twitter. I mean, persons like Sargon, who made some questionable comments on there, haven't, have been banned and haven't been checkmarked.
The interesting thing was, of course, that Sargon was banned when he was actually in a fight with the far right.
Oh, was he now?
Yes.
I don't remember. I wasn't following him.
With the far right, that's when he was banned. And he's not given a reason why. So what he actually did that was kind of below the belt and hurting the feelings of the far right has never actually been expressed by Twitter. But obviously,
No.
they thought they needed to come to the rescue of Richard Spencer and his acolytes.
As far as I was aware, I was pretty sure they got him for his "I wouldn't even" comment.
No, 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 no. That was long, long after that.
But oh well. And there we go. Have you seen the list of topics that I have for you today, sir?
I have absolutely no idea.
Lovely. Did you see something surrounding a very certain brand of ice cream recently?
Ben and Jerry's, yes.
Indeed, decided
Pecan resist. Yes.
Pecan resist, which apparently is just a rebrand of another flavor they already did. And it, as I say, it's purely for social justice points. So there we go. But let me see if I can find this article here. Yes, basically talking about how it supports 4 charities. I mean, it's not actually resisting anything. It's just giving.
Oh, it's resisting Donald Trump. This ice cream specifically dislikes Donald Trump.
Well, it couldn't have really chosen.
If you wish to express your dislike to Donald Trump, this is the ice cream for you to buy.
It really couldn't have chosen a worse, I guess, set of charities to do it, because they've been utterly ineffectual.
Well, I mean, one of the wonderful things surrounding this, of course, was also that one of the pictures, to kind of show the release of this new political ice cream, that picture also included Linda Sarsour.
Oh dear! Do you want to just explain Linda Sarsour to the audience if they're not necessarily aware?
Oh dear God! Some kind of bat crazy feminist slash Muslim who has somehow taken it upon herself to prove to the world that Islam is the most feminist kind of creed one could possibly hold.
Yes, indeed. That's her whole shtick.
Who at times then also kind of sails pretty close to the wind when it comes to Israel and anti-Semitism. Sorry, have I just caused absolute utter silence here, or have we just lost not so obvious? Am I presently talking to myself? Has the microphone died? Hello?
Hello. Not entirely sure what happened there.
It says we're still live.
We hopefully are. I leant across to adjust.
Well, this time it was you who hit the wrong button.
I intended to adjust my screen, and I think I just tapped the power button as we did so. That went well, didn't it? Good grief. Yeah. Sorry.
Yes, I wonder how much of my wondering what exactly had just happened was actually being broadcast live at the time.
Good grief. I hope all of it has, because usually it stays live for about 10 minutes. I have to connect, but
so I've just checked, and we do still seem to have a live stream on YouTube.
Yes, the chat is saying F for me, and silence is the music of life.
Lux and Lex assures me that all of it was being broadcast.
Yes. Did you say anything racy to get me demonetized?
Oh, yes, very much so. Yes.
As soon as you had the opportunity.
In the monologue was, of course, broadcast to the world there.
Yes. Let me just broadcast my screen to the world, and here we have the delightful imagery on the front of this pot of ice cream.
Yes. Yeah. Quite a few people have kind of commented on the fact that the lady at the front. Not only is it a rather kind of unattractive drawing, but she also could be interpreted to be looking quite angry.
Yes, she is. Well, I think that's probably intentional, to be perfectly honest. Like, they're a peaceful resistance of angry protesters, as they call themselves, no matter how untrue that happens to be. I love it that none of them have a natural hair color, apart from the white woman on the right, who appears to have semi-human eyebrows, but apart from that, not. Unless she's supposed to be wearing a beret.
Yeah, it's either a beret or it's orange hair.
I think knowing this movement, it could be either or. But there's nothing natural about that. But this says yes. Ben and Jerry's have unveiled a new flavor in protest of Donald Trump that celebrates activists, one of whom I believe, like the head of the Women's March.
It celebrates activists and it contains nuts. Yes.
Yes, exactly. But I'm amused by the fact that the Women's March is headed up by an actual anti-Semite, as far as I've been told, right? So I haven't corroborated this, but I'm being told
there
that
does seem to be touches of it with dear Miss Sarsour. If it's Miss or Ms, I don't know. Let's stick with Ms because that's the politically correct one, isn't it? You can't offend anybody by saying Ms.
Well, it depends, doesn't it? I mean, you didn't use, I don't know, Zuz or something like that, to be completely inclusive. Yes, the flavor is called Pecan Resist. It's made with chocolate ice cream, chunks of fudge, pecans, walnuts, and fudge-covered almonds. So yes, a wide variety of different nuts. The company announced it's part of its campaign to lick injustice.
I think you're choosing the wrong word. It's not variety; it's diversity of nuts.
Diversity of nuts. Yes, but this is one of my favorite lines. It announced it as part of its campaign to lick injustice. And to champion those fighting to create a more just and equitable nation for us all. So not more equal, more equitable. And also the idea of licking injustice. But given that how much they hate injustice, you think, you just get this image of someone like, I don't know, licking the pavement or something like that. Are they telling us that that's how horrendous the flavor of this thing is? Are you there?
I am. I'm still there. Yes. I mean, to lick in that regard, I think wasn't it Sullivan, the boxer, the first heavyweight boxer, who used the word to lick as in to knock somebody out.
I am.
In all fairness, there is a different. There is a different use of the verb.
There's a connotation. Maybe they're using a double entendre.
What I particularly like is the one in the next paragraph where we've got the company cannot be silent in the face of President Trump's policy. And you just think the company cannot be silent, and this is
the party cannot be silent in the face.
It's just this bizarre concept these days that companies are personae. That basically,
they have values,
and they have feelings, and they have values, and that therefore they cannot stand silent. This is something that offends the company so much that the company must let it be known. And you think, no, you
make ice cream.
You make ice cream.
You make ice cream.
You produce make ice cream in order to make as much money as possible.
Yes, you produce a sweet dairy-based product for me to consume. The media, provides my news and politics. Thank you very much. But it's just like, I also like the fact that a lot of Donald Trump's policies, particularly on corporation tax and that sort of things, have massively benefited companies like Ben & Jerry's. I think he reduced it from 35% to 21%.
But it's one of those things, isn't it, that you basically sort of wonder, well, what if we basically transfer this to other companies? That basically, I don't know, you go into your local Sears in America and you ask them what they think of, I don't know, the Iran deal, or I don't know, you go into your local Walmart, or you approach the Walmart management and ask them for a statement on tariffs for Chinese imports.
I'm amused because as part of military training, all of our officers have to be quote unquote woke on current affairs. You have to have a good understanding of what's going on in the world. Just in the off chance that a member of the public asks you, you have to appear good in the face of, you've got to be a face for the military. And I'm just imagining that if you go through management training for a small retail store, that you have to have a similar level of, it's like, what do you think foreign policy should be with regards to the Crimean Peninsula? And then they have to respond with some intelligent comment.
And you just ask one after the other, given they're all military types, one after the other just says, nuke 'em. The whole, each one you ask in the line. Like, was it Joe Neverton having said, companies anthropomorphize themselves? And yeah, it is true that that's precisely, in a way, what they're doing. That we're supposed to believe that a company is some sort of character.
Well, it's an interesting transition, isn't it? Because companies always used to be, as you say, just for profit. And nowadays, with the massive increase in the, I guess, the spending power of the average citizen, certainly in the West, companies sort of have to do something above and beyond just producing a product. And so people now align themselves, and also with the reach of the internet, like every single company has a Twitter account or a Facebook page or an Instagram or whatever. So they all have to go above and beyond in their social media outreach to sort of
Yes, but
prove.
what's the political affiliation of Licorice Allsorts?
Exactly. Well,
Do you understand?
I
I
think
mean,
they should stay out of politics. But it's It's funny to see that, and understandable, I suppose, that they see it as a natural extension of the corporate climate. Where they have a sort of forced altruism to pander to their audience, and they have a so in a sense, a business has a sort of moral code, even if it is for profit. And then they now have to apply this. But of course, as we know, companies act, one, psychopathically, and secondly, they don't have any steadfast morals. It's all
well,
completely dependent on the market they're trying to reach.
you see, I have always been confused about the kind of postmodern version of the brand. It's completely baffled me right from the beginning. I have never been part of that kind of societal move, if you know what I mean. That I may have spoken about this before. Forgive me if I'm repeating myself. That I remember a time when we all knew what a Mars bar was and Nescafe, and the beauty about a Mars bar and Nescafe was that if you would say you'd for business reasons or whatever, you'd gone to Tokyo, and you just arrived, it's evening, everything is closed, and if it's not closed, everything is in Japanese and you can't read it anyway.
Yes, and you've planted your flag to claim the country for the empire. Yes.
Yeah, and you kind of stumble into a supermarket desperately looking for something that you can actually recognize. And there is a tin of Nescafe and there are some Mars bars, and you know what they are. You instantly know what they are.
Yeah, brand awareness.
Not only do you know what they are, the brand also gives you a kind of guarantee of quality. You know that it will be what you expect it to be, so to speak.
Sort of old dairy milk.
However, that began to change, I would say somewhere in the 90s or so.
Okay.
It particularly began to change when brands began to branch out into territories where, which didn't make sense. So Adidas, what are Adidas known for? Sportswear.
Shoes and sportswear.
Yeah. So why do they make perfume? What guarantee? What guarantee of quality is their brand?
I'm sorry. Just as a side there, I do remember one Christmas where my aunt and uncle, bless them, always used to go for the standard Christmas present of the Lynx box set or whatever it happens to be. And I remember one year they got me Adidas, like Jupe Homme or whatever they call it, eau de toilette. It was just like.
And you will have looked at it and sort of thought, well, they're good at making shoes.
Yes, but I don't want to smell like a shoe.
How do I know that they're making football boots in any way guarantees they're making, shower gel that is,
well, and given
that they branch out in something like that.
Well, and given that they make, their shoes for less than £2 a pop, you wonder how cheap their perfume is from the cost per quantity.
This has happened everywhere, So Porsche, I think, at some point started making, spectacle frames, and you just go, why? What's got to do with cars?
Well, I know Ferrari has a range of products, everything from cutlery and Tupperware to.
That proves my point exactly.
Everything. Although it's kind of more like a you get Ferrari fanboys who will never be able to afford a Ferrari, but will buy the mug.
That is precisely it. The Ferrari, that is perhaps the most extreme version of that. But that's just it. That people have a relationship, literally a relationship with a brand, and that therefore you are more able to sell them something additional that may not actually fit into the product range that brand normally represents, and people will purchase it. And this happened across the board.
I'm going to disagree with you slightly.
Already at that point, did I just basically say, I'm sorry, but the world's going insane. And in a way, this kind of anthropomorphization of brands is in a way the next step after that.
I'm going to disagree with you slightly. I think
you're about to say something that is wrong, but please.
I may say something that's it's not a direct disagreement with yours, but it's sort of a caveat.
It's only partially wrong.
So it's looking at shush. But basically, you're saying that effectively the companies are coming up with different ways to generate brand loyalty. And the politicization of sort of their company values or whatever is one of the ways in which they seek to retain customers. I think that it's partially response. I don't disagree with that behavior. I think it's partially a response to the fact that brand loyalty has been decreasing overall, because we live in a much more sort of global market now, and we also have a much more people don't go and shop at their local grocery store anymore. That's not something which people shop around, and supermarkets are everywhere. So whereas before you used to have maybe 1 or 2 supermarkets within the vicinity of where you lived, now you've probably got 4 or 5 that you could go to, and they're all competing with each other for customers. And then you've also got and quality of products, particularly in the general retail sphere, has shot through the roof, particularly in the last 20 or 30 years. And so there's really not that much difference between the product stocked by one supplier and by one retailer and another. And so this behavior that you're seeing is the only way they can differentiate themselves from the competition, in a manner of speaking. I mean, some companies will always have that sort of, are still hanging on to, I suppose, their reputation of quality. Places like Waitrose and that sort of thing, where it's considered in polite society that's where that's where the posh people go to shop. And the Marks and Spencers as well. But think of all the retailers who are caught sort of in between budget and upper class, places like Tesco and Sainsbury's, etc., who aren't trying to do the Asda and Lidl thing. What do they have to make themselves different, apart from just
what is it, the unique sales point?
Yes, what makes you go to them other than the competition? Because they've all got cards with point systems and whatnot, and they've all got deals which rotate. It's like my parents are quite partial to a bit of Ben and Jerry's or Haagen-Dazs.
Yes, that is kind of, that is sort of specifically focusing on supermarket retailers.
Sure, but I mean, you can extend it to.
If you take, for example, the world's favorite brand, which is Apple.
Okay.
Then that is largely because it's the cool brand.
Well, it's not. It's not cool.
They've entirely managed to build a business model on that by now.
Apple has managed to build its entire business model off being very friendly to the technophobic.
Yes, but you can point to their product, but their product does not justify people queuing for the product on the first day.
No, they've got a phenomenal reputation.
They have. Well, no, this is just it. This is not technological reputation or anything.
I'm not talking about technological reputation.
It's they are rock and roll. They are cool. They are with it, and that is what sells them. That's what they basically base their premium on. That's why you've got a bigger profit margin with Apple than with other smartphones.
Mm.
And that reputation for coolness precedes iPads and iPods and whatever, that already, just when they were selling computers, the entire design industry, anything that wanted to be, a little avant-garde or whatever, they would all get Apples. They wouldn't get PCs. Because
I remember
those were the cool ones.
I remember it was a different story. Apple in the UK typically was much more for creative types and hipsters, but it really took off in the US compared to Microsoft. So Microsoft sort of dominated the UK market for everyone who didn't want to effectively draw things, and Apple really only came on the scene in the UK, I would say, with not just portable music storage, but also when they developed, when it became clear that the design between every single one of their models was going to be so consistent that anyone could use it. And so it didn't really matter what your level of technical knowledge was. You could use an Apple product, and you would be obviously assured that the operating system on it was going to be relatively the same, unlike something like Android, and indeed on some Microsoft platforms where there was sometimes drastic differences between programs. I'm going to jump through some super chats now, as we've been lagging behind. So Dr. Martin Luther Pepe has donated 50 SEK. I forget what SEK is. Like it's a form of krona, no doubt. Who says, wasn't Sargon once banned for sending the alt-right interracial gay porn? It wouldn't put it past him. I wouldn't put it past him at all. That sounds like something that he would do. John Stewart says, Ben & Jerry's, owned by Unilever since 2000. Doesn't Unilever own tons of bathroom products? You think? Pretty sure.
I think they do. I mean, they're kind of, cleansing products and stuff like that. Yes.
Yes, and women's feminine hygiene and that sort of thing. This is another thing where a lot of companies have parent companies now, which are far in excess of them. So you get things like Kraft owning something stupid in the sweets market, but because they're just a parent company, they're not actually a part of the market. It's not a monopoly or whatever. Joan Everton, you stole this super chat from me, Britisher. Thank you very much. Companies anthropomorphize themselves. It's a brand tactic. Yes, indeed. Tim Cornish says, watch any advert, any medium, and 30 seconds in, you find out what the product is. It's all good vibes and out virtue signaling everyone else. Well, I can understand the good vibes part. They want you to associate good emotions with their particular product, unless it's a horror movie. But it's amazing how many adverts these days do not have a product in them. You can watch some adverts and you're not sure what it's been trying to sell you by the end. That's also it. Although I will admit that I probably haven't watched an advert in at least 3 years, so it's quite difficult to have much apart from for the memes, with the whole Pepsi thing a little while back. Joan Everton says, for £2, thank you, sir. There are stacks of branding lit. It's all there are stacks of branding literature, I assume he means. It's all intentional. Yes, 100%. All of it's intentional. And all of it is done, like these companies don't actually hold to these values that they claim to hold, do they? It's all a marketing ploy.
Are you trying to tell me they don't really care?
Whether or not Donald Trump's policies are, I think they don't. The owners might, but the company as a whole can't.
Oh, I don't believe you. I'm sure you're lying, because I'm quite sure that all these multinational global conglomerates are actually very caring.
So, there are some fairly large companies. So take something like BrewDog, right? which has grown into a massive organization now, comparatively. And it's what you might call a medium-sized company. And their creators, the creators of their drinks, certainly have a very, very left-leaning bias, and they will pull stunts just because that's what they believe in and that sort of thing. And part of it's for marketing, but part of it's just because they're a bit nuts and very left-leaning. So, some people can have that sort of idea, but I think at the top of enormous multinationals, what may be just either a general feeling amongst a couple of people can be translated by the people who have no such feeling into a marketing ploy.
When you've got some enormous multinational and there's a downturn in the economy and they'll have to lay off 35,000 people, I'm sure they do it caringly.
Yes, every time. When they bring the contractors into Axe, it's all with a notion of care. Tim Cornish again, $1.99. Thank you, sir. It says corporations and Orange Man bad. Good vibes good. Yes, I think that really sums it up. There you go. Good evening, Tailed Feature. Welcome.
Good evening.
How long have you been sitting there? Goodness me.
A couple of minutes, just eating a bacon roll.
Yeah, very haram of you. The let me see. The Brewdog.
I've never had an Apple product because I'm Scottish and we hate fruit.
Also, you're poor.
Touche.
I thought it would have just been loyalty to the Beatles.
No.
I
think that probably went over most people's heads, British. But there you go.
Right, I got it. That's all that matters.
Yes. Let me see. I like Brewdog. Need to try and use something. I like Brewdog's products, but I don't like their politics.
Right now, there must be a proportion of our audience furiously Googling Apple and Beatles as we speak.
No doubt. But I think that's pretty much the end. Although, if I move down... Oh, yes, we were talking about how the company cannot be silent in the face of President Trump's policies, weren't we? Back before we got a little bit off topic.
Off on this spiraling tangent.
Indeed.
And these we're talking about, is it?
This is about Ben and Jerry's #resist ice cream, right?
Cringe.
Basically, the company cannot be silent in the face of President Trump's policies, which attack and attempt to roll back decades of progress on racial and gender equity, climate change, LGBTQ rights, and refugee and immigrant rights. All issues that have been at the core of the company's social mission for 40 years.
Sure.
For 40 years. I don't think that's been something at the heart of their company for 40 years for start. Unless this is also...
Transgender rights were a core value of theirs 40 years ago.
Yeah, when it was illegal and considered to be a mental health issue. Yeah, I definitely think that was on the agenda when they first started making ice cream. The first batch that they made was contained both chocolate and vanilla, so that it was for racial equity, and obviously had a sprinkling of, I don't know, whatever you would put in there for LGBTQ. There's also the this idea that basically he's trying to roll back.
Let me guess, that ice cream would have been called Transtastic.
Transtastic. This idea that he's trying to roll back progress on racial and gender equity, climate change. It's like, well, he isn't. He's stopping an unfair hiring policy which breaks the law. And the only thing I really disagree with him on with regards to this side of things is I think his stance on climate change is a bit stupid. And I think that his approach to sort of the immigration problem at the border is not ideal either. But I wouldn't say that he's trying to roll back decades of progress. I think he's correcting a number of ills and he's making a couple of mistakes.
You could look at this the other way and say that actually it's it's all a conservative conspiracy to get the feminists even fatter by eating lots of ice cream and then killing them off with diabetes.
Well, actually, that's where I need to say something. Because,
really?
I always held to this view that, feminists were the unattractive women. And it was precisely that. It was precisely attractive women turning up on television, starting to spout this miasma of nonsense that began kind of signaling to me, heaven help us, something's going on. Because we all know what the kind of, what the stereotypical feminist kind of looks like in everyone's mind's eye. And that is because there's a certain amount of truth to it. I mean, you only need to, everybody who doesn't believe me, just Google Andrea Dworkin. She is the most quoted feminist writer of all of them. Have a look at that and then tell me I'm wrong. But it was when the latest batch, in the last few years of, people coming out of university, filled to the brim with this talk of, sexual politics, started coming out, and it was the attractive ones as well as the unattractive ones that you suddenly realized, oh my, the brainwashing is getting better.
Well, they got into the education system, didn't they? That was the main thing.
Yes, but
it also became trendy, didn't it, for this to happen? So you get all kinds of celebrities who are the quote-unquote beautiful people kind of thing.
Precisely, yes, the beautiful people and everything. They began spouting this too. And that's just it. Prior to that, there was a resistance. There was a barrier there because, everybody really knew it was the Andrea Dworkins and Germaine Greers. That's where it was at home. And somehow it managed to jump that species barrier. And it was species. It was once that happened. That's when we were in real trouble.
Never underestimate the ability of the Britisher to suddenly turn unfathomably savage in the turn of phrase that he chooses. I've just noticed something.
My channel isn't monetized.
You heathen. There's something I've just noticed, which is even worse. I thought initially that they were giving a portion of the profits from this ice cream sales to these charities, and that was the big push of it or whatever. But no, it's donating 25 grand to 4 separate organizations. Now, I don't know whether or not that's 100,000 total that's split 4 ways, or if they're literally splitting
it
whatever
doesn't
it is.
say each, does it?
No, it doesn't. Splitting, what would it be like?
That's a very good point to point out, because I basically had also naively assumed that it meant a proportion went to these, inverted commas, charities.
I mean, this company, and Unilever by extension, makes billions.
Yes, and it basically will have cost them more to get the packaging design and posters.
The marketing will have cost them more than they're giving to these people.
Yes.
So props to Ben & Jerry's for spending money on useless marketing because it's had a massive backlash, and then obviously giving away pennies.
I don't know if you have seen Sargon's twist when this came out. He also did a video on it.
Mm-hmm.
And he basically pointed out that it was effectively the corporations now beginning to take over the fashionable SJW talking points. That, in a way, in his view, the activists are being usurped by the corporations. That once the corporations see, oh, there's a buck in this, we'll jump on this bandwagon. We'll take it over. Thank you very much.
I think it's horrendous. I just think they've completely shot themselves in the foot. But apparently they've also Ben & Jerry's have also rolled out flavors including Empowerment, whatever that is, and Bernie's Yearning in support of Bernie Sanders. I mean, I don't want any of Bernie's yearning, but thank you very much.
He's such a shell.
I love that there's only one comment on this, and it says, "Excellent. Let's lobby for an ice cream featuring Bolsonaro, Putin, and Erdogan."
Of course, the whole thing about Trump is reversing policy on climate change. Unilever are one of the worst companies in the world for destroying natural habitats and poisoning drinking water and all that kind of thing in third world countries. So
Oh dear. Not
So
dodgy
you
at
mean
all.
to say they've been given $25,000 to these campaigns rather than to Flint, Michigan?
Yes, indeed. Indeed.
I've just been sent an article in the chat, which I want you to read the headline of, Britisher. I know how much you love to read headlines.
Is this going to be? Oh dear God, that already starts very promising with that particular name, doesn't it?
Oh yes.
Anthony Ekundayo Lennon, white theatre director who described himself as African-born again, given job meant for people of colour.
Oh, is this the Irish guy?
Oh yeah, white Irish actor who won paid traineeship as theatre practitioner of colour said he went through the struggles of black man despite being born to white Irish parents. I mean, are there struggles of a black man? I mean, way to generalize for a start. But yes, it's just he's found himself at the center of a debate around racial identity. Anthony, who worked on all black productions, is among 4 people who won a paid traineeship as a theatre practitioner of colour last year.
Theatre practitioner of colour.
I mean, it's something to put on your CV. I mean, the opportunity was funded by a £406,500 grant from Arts Council England to deliver a comprehensive programme of talent development for future BAME leaders. Okay, how does one go from theatre practitioner of colour to leader of the BAME people?
Yeah, I find it interesting how it's gone from BAME to BAME, and it happened very quickly.
Well,
Yeah,
I'm waiting. I'm waiting. I should transition to just reading it as Barmy, right?
You just need to put Latinos in there, and that'll be blame.
Blame leaders. The actor reportedly applied on the basis of his mixed heritage, having previously claimed he had gone through the struggles of a black man despite being born to white Irish parents. Growing up, Mr. Lennon's high cheekbones and curly hair led people to see him as mixed race, making him the target of racial slurs, according to an ebook that he wrote 10 years ago and unearthed by the Sunday Times.
Amazing.
I'm gonna have to just click through this. My jeans are white, but I'm black.
I really hope this guy is an elaborate troll.
Wasn't there some line in what was it, the Irish band, come on, you will know this, Tell Feature, the film about the Irish band singing soul music?
The Commitments.
The Commitments, precisely. Wasn't there a line in that film where the blacks of Ireland or something like that?
Maybe it's been a long time since I've seen that film. So,
I
really hope it's an elaborate troll. And if not, then I suppose it just shows you what the end result of all this nonsense is. That everything is just meaningless. You know, race is meaningless. You know, and it completely undermines everything that they're striving for.
I'm just reminded of who was it? This American girl who had her brief 15 minutes of fame a couple of years back.
Dolezal or whatever her name is.
Dolezal. Rachel
Dolezal.
Who said that she was black, but she was who said that she was white, but she was black, or something like that?
No. She made out to be black, and not only did she make out to be black, she was also a figure in a black civil rights movement.
Oh, wasn't that? Didn't she have like metal teeth or something?
No.
I vaguely recall her going completely off the. She might have just worn them as like glamour thing, but the I remember a very strange thing where she basically was being filmed speaking in ghetto speak, you know, and changing, like, she had very middle class American parents, and yet she would speak like, I don't know, she'd come from downtown Detroit in the 70s, you know, like
Huggy Bear.
Yeah. One of the leading lights in British black theatre was wrestling with the question of what makes a person black, because apparently it's not melanin level in skin anymore.
That is because they're trying to make out that is such a thing as a black experience.
I like that like he's effectively claiming to be trans black, right?
Yes.
And but the controversy is not that he's claiming to be black; it's that it's emerged that he previously described himself as white Britisher. Previously described as white, and therefore it's clearly false if he previously described himself as
Well,
white.
are the Irish considered white? Have we got any alt-right people in the chat that might be able to give us the lowdown on that? Because last time I seem to remember the jury was out.
There is actually some racial mixing going on, isn't there, in Ireland, that is actually historical, because I believe there were some black Spanish sailors and whatever, due to their being Catholic and there being a certain closeness in that respect.
Quite possibly, but I know that obviously during sort of British colonial times, we didn't consider the Irish being white, did we?
It is minuscule, but apparently there are still, once in a while there is a kind of freak birth that actually shows some signs of something that actually happened generations back, if you know what I mean.
I also think that back in those times, we barely considered the Irish to be human. So,
well, yes, that's the point I was getting at. Yeah,
yes.
I was speaking a little bit more diplomatic than you.
Yeah, you know me. I'm very undiplomatic. I love this. They're so, I guess, like they're trying to pussyfoot around us. They can't just say that last week some black thespians expressed disquiet that an apparently white man had taken a black person's place on a BAME scheme, on a balmy scheme, and you just go,
Did they just assume that man's gender?
They just assumed his gender. They assumed his race, and they assumed his gender. I love the fact that they're confused. They're sitting down here, looking at this white guy born to white Irish parents with white Irish grandparents, and going, he's telling us he's black, but he's apparently white. I mean,
but you see, with that deflection I just did, did you just assume this person's gender? Do you see how much endless deflection on either side is actually possible in order not to talk about a subject?
Oh, indeed. He was paid a 2-year residential traineeship, and he was an assistant director on an all-black production, or Britain's first all-black production of Guys and Dolls. Very progressive.
Well, apparently not all black production.
There you go. However, they unearthed that he wrote an ebook that shows racial identity is not always black and white. Everyone on the planet is African. It's your choice as to whether you accept this.
So that means that race is meaningless then. So why keep talking about it?
That you know what? If he is an elaborate troll, this is the best troll.
It's been going on for 10 years.
10-year plan. Talk about Sargon and his 5-year plan, but the 10-year plan for this guy is insane. And then he stated, this contrasts with his account of heritage in 1990, which he stated, my parents are white, so their parents, so their parents, so their parents. So 5 generations.
Well, that's not contrasting then. That's not really contrasting. If he's saying that everybody is black, and everybody can be black and have the black experience, and it's completely meaningless if your parents were white or whatever color.
He says his school caretaker called him the N-word and threatened to attack him with a dog, although that's possibly because he was Irish.
Fucking pikeys.
Knackers, I think they call them over there. Owing partly to the taunts, the boy with the caramel skin discovered his blackness and started to wear a Rastafarian hat.
Yeah, because that's going to make you, not stick out anymore.
So African. He's Jamaican. I mean, like, not to take sort of the left's identity politics so far, but this is like the whitest story I've ever heard in my entire life. Up until the age of 13 or 14, I hadn't really thought about it at all, he later told friends. It's funny that. Oh, God. And academics make a distinction about racial passing now. When a person of one race or mixed heritage presents themselves as belonging to another racial group. So, I think we'll call that the racial transition, to be perfectly honest. Transracial. Phoneticizing. It's called phoneticizing, apparently. And so on. In phonetics, race is what the onlooker sees. Oh, I see. He became what the others saw. So he's become black because other people assumed he was black and called him black.
Well, that's just like, if someone says, "Oh, you're a fucking retard," over and over and over again, and then you go, "Okay, I'm a retard."
Yeah, and Scotland was born.
So essentially, if one is a British spy dropped off in France during the Second World War, and the Germans think you're French, then you're actually French.
Actually French. It doesn't matter what you believe. It's all about what other people label you. You have to remember. In fact, he may not even be black because even if he doesn't believe he's black because people are looking at him and going, "Well, you have a black and minority ethnic scholarship. You've been on an all black production, and people have been calling you black and giving you racial slurs. You must be black." In fact, he might have a fight on his hands when he comes clean about this all being a troll.
Well, then again, I mean, there's a very good chance that he might have 1024th blackness in him.
1024th. That's all you need, because once you go black, you never go back, as they know.
I'm sure the British are well aware of that.
There we go.
Somehow.
He says to me, "I've got an identity problem." It's just a very strange story.
And there's Rachel Dolezal.
Oh, there's your pal.
And there's Dolezal. I was thinking of the chat brought it up. A brief star called Woe Vicky, who was a very strange young lady who had a very similar problem.
Yeah, but that was what do they call it? It's flexing, isn't it? People who kind of, as you say, speak a certain ghetto speak. But most of that is about kind of showing off how much money one has, and hence it's referred to as flexing. And she seemed, I'm not. I think at least that's one of the people we're talking about, and. I think what was it? Poisoning the Well. They made one or two clips about precisely these sorts of personalities and just how ridiculous it is, and how completely unconvincing they actually are in their ghetto speak. If you actually just analyze to the tiniest bit what they're actually doing in their videos.
How interesting. Here we have VJ as well. An Indian American with poor grades who pretended that he was Jojo, the African American, to take advantage of the affirmative action policy in his area and win admission to St. Louis University School of Medicine. When the story broke in 2015, the school denied that race had played a factor in his admission, and so on and so forth.
Well, you've just seen above. You've seen that picture of Rachel Dolezal.
Yes.
So that is basically. That is the attempt in which she tries to black herself up. Now, if you look at the link that I've provided on the sidebar there,
okay,
so that is pre that.
Oh my, yes, that's
freckles and everything.
So you're telling me that she's putting on she's putting on blackface, effectively,
just a tad. So one clearly went out of one's way in order to deny one's own racial background.
It's incredibly pale, really.
Yes, that is a very pale black person.
Yes. A pale face, as one might call it. There you go.
Cricket is.
How strange. Well, thank you for that article. I can't remember who exactly sent it to me in the chat, but thank you for that one. We have another super chat which has come through. Joe Neverton says, "I still think pretty feminists use it as an insurance policy in case they realize they're incompetent, i.e. I'll claim sexism unless you promote me." I can't say much about that one. And Joel Kelly says, for £2, "The Irish were oppressed first. Hashtag BIAME. Hashtag 800 years.
They just can't let it go.
One famine, and then they won't let it go."
But then again, I mean, we were oppressed by the Romans, and they were not. So we get first complaint, I guess.
Oh, I suppose so.
But the Irish, the only people that could starve on an island surrounded by fish.
They don't know how to fish. The
Evidently not.
let me see. I'm going to move on now to just going to close down a couple of bits and pieces. Oh yes, we have a couple of different things. Public health campaigns. So this is an interesting thing, and I want to talk about it because I was discussing this with a colleague earlier today about the idea of what a government should and shouldn't provide, etc., and what public health campaigns we currently run. So this idea, are you aware of any public health campaigns going on at the moment, Britisher or Tailed Feature?
Well, evidently in Scotland we don't listen to them, so no. Well, I suppose there's obviously like still a lot of kind of anti-smoking stuff going on. Like if you buy a packet of cigarettes, they're absolutely emblazoned with, cancerous lungs and people with teeth falling out and everything. Just the usual Scottish population, really.
I mean, you don't deep fry your cigarettes anymore, so I suppose that's progress.
Deep fried smoke.
Yes. And Britisher, are you aware of any public health campaigns at the moment?
Well, I'm just trying to think. I mean, yes, I mean the smoking. That's what we're all aware of. Aside from that, I mean, no doubt there will be some kind of public health advice available on alcohol and salt and things like that. But I'm not really aware of any high,
high energy campaigns which are in the public eye.
Yeah, any sort of high visibility campaigns at the moment. No.
So I think we've already answered this question. For the first part.
Sorry, I'm just laughing at something that Silly Sailor said in the chat.
Oh,
Found
he's
it
very
odd.
silly.
Yeah, found it odd that Irish had a potato famine. The potato had only been introduced to Ireland less than a century before. It would be like having a quinoa famine today.
Yes, this is one of those things. There's a YouTuber I watch called The Killian Experience, and he produces very silly videos about different games. But one of the things that he did recently was he was sick to death of fantasy video games putting potatoes in there because they weren't discovered. They were only brought across from Peru or something like that, like 700 years ago, and they didn't have them in the Middle Ages and stuff like that. He's just going, why are there potatoes?
You also get that in a lot of films in which someone is putting the stocks and then they throw vegetables at him. Now, I mean, aside from the fact that in the Middle Ages, food was in a way too valuable to throw it at prisoners in stocks. But aside from that, yes, they also like to throw tomatoes at them.
Yes.
It's just like potatoes came from a certain continent that wasn't accessible at the time.
I think more likely they threw rocks. Of
course, it was the pillory, not the stocks, wasn't it?
Oh, probably.
Just saying.
And if people can see, Count Dankula is just telling me he's too ill to flex his dominance. So despite him telling me that he can't come on this evening because he's ill, he's somehow managed to get himself onto the stream. There we go. But the health secretary wants to encourage people in England. Oh, no, is it specifically in England? Right, you're cut off, Tailed Feature. You don't get the benefits of health programs.
Well, evidently.
And Wales doesn't exist, so it's fine. To make better choices around their alcohol, sugar, salt, and fat intake. It's almost like you've been reading this before, Britisher. Whilst getting more exercise. It should be whilst, not while. And he's promising to spend more on public awareness initiatives to prevent obesity, which is quite surprising given that the fat rights campaigners basically produced a whole load of stuff when I think it was Cancer Research UK basically put up a poster saying if you're fat you're likely to get cancer and die, and I've changed it now to something more tasteful, which is they're assuming that obese people can't read, right? Because their current campaign is like a hangman.
Oh, is that the letter? Yeah, the letter.
And it has O, missing letters, and then Y at the end, and it says, guess what the biggest cause of cancer after smoking is? It's just obesity. But and apparently that passed. But 3 of the best well-known health messages are eating 5 portions a day of fruit and vegetables, 150 minutes of exercise a week, and quitting smoking. But what evidence is there that these have worked? I was just thinking about this, and I was going, the amount of money that they spent on something like the 5 fruit and veg thing a day. Like it's an awful lot of money that goes into these sorts of things, and you wonder whether or not it would be more effective for them to literally just subsidize fruit or something, and then that would make people want, because
chances are if they subsidized fruit, all they would do is make it cheaper for those people who are already buying it anyway.
Exactly. But you just wonder how are you going to encourage society just to do it? Well, you could heavily tax things you don't want people to eat. You can subsidize things you do, but not that I would ever advise that, because I think it's ridiculous to have that much government control in it. But I mean, we're seeing that sort of already with the sugar tax, isn't it? That's currently going on.
I mean, when it comes to sort of health campaigns or whatever, the most famous one, I guess, the one that really had an impact, and was actually happening worldwide at the time, was in the 80s, and that was the AIDS campaign.
Yes.
And here in this country, it was Norman Fowler, who was an entirely oily individual. But for once in his life actually did something good, and basically took on the political establishment at the time and said, look, we need to do something. This hideous disease is coming, and people are dying like flies. So we either start informing them what actually is happening, or we sit on our conservative backsides and are too prim and proper to talk about it.
Yes.
And there was considerable resistance in government at the time, and he just basically kept on badgering them until eventually he got his way. And it's funny that this, as I say, this rather oily character now looks back and basically thinks that was more than likely the most significant thing he ever did. And he's more than likely right in it, yes. So when it comes to these public health campaigns, they can really have a significant impact. But it's a matter of actually getting the message across quite dramatically, but at the same time there also being a kind of urgent need of which you can actually convince the populace. And when it came to AIDS globally, yes, when that campaign went out all around the planet, yes, they basically realized, look, this is serious. This could be the new plague if we don't do something about it.
So just looking at these stats for more contemporary health campaigns, I don't think we could say that they've done very much. The overweight people have gone down as a piece, people have gone up. I wonder why that is. And it's such a high percentage. It's absolutely horrendous. Like 65% or something now.
Well, then again, you don't know. Without those campaigns, those figures might be much higher.
Also true, although over the course of those campaigns, they appear to have had zero effect. So there you go. So unless you're saying that we're looking,
they may have prevented a rise.
Yes, we were looking at exponential growth in obese and overweight people, and instead we
we managed to just keep it level. Yes.
Keeping the bar where it is, So that side of things. And then 5 a day, much the same. For some reason, I assume that's when most of it went live, 2005, 2006. But it appears to have just gone down again. I mean, I know that for a start, I don't eat 5 portions a day, let alone 5 fruit or veg portions a day. So that's probably one of the main factors behind that one being only 25%. But there you go.
People know that eating shit food is going to make you fat. They just don't care.
Yes. I also think that there's something to be said for rising rates of depression and people using food as a crutch. To sort of.
Yeah, and we know that fat people and crutches don't go well together.
No, that's why we give them scooters.
Yeah.
But there you go.
Who was that stand-up comedian? I forget his name. Who says, "Yeah, they're not scooters; they're obesicles."
Obesicles.
There's a phenomenal South Park episode where Cartman gets given an obesity scooter, and they've got people driving around and they literally fill aisles. And there's something about South Park's very simplistic animation and sort of drawing quality that, but just make this because they've got very simple backgrounds. So you just got this enormous character sort of spilling over the edges of their mobility scooter, going "Excuse me" down the aisle. And I just remember that Cartman ends up complaining that there's a line for the obesical queue, effectively, like the disabled because you're fat queue, because there's so many fat people taking disabled spaces, and he tries to get the one kid who's got no legs actually kicked off the line because he's not fat enough. It's like, yeah, welcome to our world. There we are at the moment. But I thought it was an interesting one, just from like, how would we, if we had control of the health secretary's position, what kind of campaigns or policies would we actually implement? Because it appears that, as you say, that these different graphs show that very little has changed. People's knowledge about nutrition, etc., hasn't really changed, nor has the nutritional advice that they've given been very good. The only one which really has had an impact is smoking, and I'd say that's more to do with the fact that it's less to do with the stuff they're plastering all over the packets, more to do with the sort of an increased awareness of general health in younger people, and also the fact that
availability of vaping.
The availability of vaping, but also you can no longer smoke in most places. Like the blanket bans across. You don't smoke in buildings, you don't smoke in pubs, that sort of thing, has had a real impact, I think. Also, probably the widespread knowledge about leukemia deaths, which has gone up.
Also, the price of cigarettes is absolutely astronomical.
The tax is high on them, and they changed so you could only sell them in packs of 20, so that you couldn't buy them in packs of 10, which kids were doing. So there is that side of things. But and so I think you could probably, like, I don't think it's anything that the health secretary has done which has caused this rather solid decrease in smoking. Although I am still surprised that it is higher than that. It is 18%ish there. 16.4% apparently today, so sort of 1 or 2 in 20, 3 in 20, sorry. And I'm surprised that that's a thing. I didn't realize it was that high in general, but there you go. Do you have any ideas, Britisher? How are you going to solve the British healthcare crisis?
I have absolutely no idea whatsoever. I think the one thing they ought to do is basically take a leaf out of the continent, and basically realize that the making available the possibility for sport is one very good way of fighting it.
So one of my cousins who live in Belgium, and my aunt and uncle live there as well, obviously. But the one of the big things there that there's a big social pressure to do is all the kids go do athletics every single week, irrespective of the family.
Well, I mean, where I grew up, in a sort of there was a forest nearby, and in that forest there was a running track, which was actually the surface was sawdust, which they just used from the logging and whatever of the forest. So it was a freely available material to them. So all they had was kind of logs laid end to end that formed the kind of boundaries of the running track, if you know what I mean. And then they just filled that up with sawdust, if you know what I mean.
I do know what you mean. Do you know what I mean?
And then that was merely the final. Position. But prior to that, there was kind of like a following the paths through the forest. Every few hundred yards, there would be some kind of exercise proposed.
Equipment. Okay.
So, it would just basically, again, it would be stuff made up of wood that could just basically readily be provided by the foresters, if you know what I mean. So there was no real great cost to it. But the cost that obviously needed to pay for it was actually provided by private healthcare insurers.
Hmm.
So they had obviously realized that, hang on a moment, to provide a facility with which people can actually keep themselves fit, it's a cost to us. But given that we otherwise have to pay for their diseases, if you know what I mean, given that we are the private insurers, it actually is in our interest to provide this for free to them. And in a way, given that the state here is the private healthcare insurer, it would be in the interest of the state to do exactly the same thing. Try and provide free facilities with which people can actually keep themselves fit. And like that, you save billions on the NHS.
Well, the argument being you spend, I mean, a similar thing is made for the prison service, isn't it? £1 spent on education saves £3 in prisons.
Yeah. But what I mean is,
well, local government.
At it purely from the perspective that clearly private insurance companies think it is worth their while in doing that.
Yes.
So they must obviously have done a cost-benefit analysis.
Indeed.
In that respect, given what the NHS costs the entire state over here, and given that the NHS fulfills the role of those private insurance companies over here, it would make sense to do the same thing.
I mean, a lot of local councils do. My parents' local council just recently has put in sort of free exercise equipment in a number of the parks, and certainly where I live now in London, it's everywhere. So I think it is a trend which is going on. But let's move on, shall we? I have a brief article just because I want to hear you try and pronounce. In fact, both of you can try and pronounce this word, right? All will become clear in just a moment. An entire Japanese island has disappeared as a government launches a rescue mission. I don't know whether or not that's for the people on it or for the island itself. But can you just try and pronounce the uninhabited islet of what?
Izanbehana Kito Kojima.
I can't, I'm dead.
Izanbehana Kito Kojima.
Izanbehana Kito.
Do you want me to do it in my broadest Scottish accent?
You try it.
All right. Izanbehana Kita Kojima Kun.
Kojima-kun?
No, I had Ken on the end.
Oh, God.
That's what we do on my side of the country.
Oh, is that right? Bloody
Ken.
tuktas.
Daddy tuktas.
Don't you take the piss out of my accent, sir. Izanbehana Kita Kojima. It was used to delineate Japan's territorial waters, and I just thought it was interesting that they have all these tiny... it's gone missing. It's buggered off. It's near Tahiti now. A search mission has been launched after an entire island disappeared. It was used to delineate territorial waters and 500 meters off the coast of a village near the northern tip of Hokkaido. One of 158 uninhabited islands given names by the country's government in 2014 to mark Japanese territorial waters. You wonder whether or not it was just a whale that was sleeping. Don't you?
Turtle. Yes.
It was pretending to be an island as to avoid the fleets. How the Japanese tend to. But I just thought it was really interesting that they have these tidal islands which come and go basically, and the Japanese government is pissed off because its territorial waters shrink because a piece of land decided that it was going to bugger off. As you do, but on to my main topic.
You just wonder whether that island must have just disappeared in some kind of earthquake or something. I mean, something must have happened for an island to disappear.
Aliens.
Aliens
von Däniken is among us. Yes.
So here's the final article of the evening, which says the ordinary people making the world more right-wing. Those damned ordinary people, Britisher and Tail Feature, just those damned ordinary people. If only they would learn. If only they would learn to be more progressive. This is by Professor Richard Young, so he knows what he's talking about. Around the world, conservative groups have been gaining influence, bolstering the power of right-wing leaders, a trend driven not only by older generations, but also by the young.
So everyone then, basically.
Yes.
Popular opinion.
Apart from those the middle-aged people, the people in the middle seem to be okay. But there you go. The rapid rise of Brazil's new far-right leader Jair Bolsonaro may have surprised some observers. Hasn't he been called like the Brazilian Trump or something like that? I think that's the new thing.
I think, if you don't want the man to win, then it might help if you don't stab him.
Yes, it also might help if you didn't treat ordinary people as idiots, like in a condescending way. Like the tone has already started in a sort of a.
The level of crime in Brazil is off the scale, and I really don't think people quite understand just how shall we say how debased humanity has become in some parts of Brazil.
I mean, it's getting close to or worse than some parts of South Africa where you'll be killed for your phone or less.
It's worse. It's worse.
Really?
Last year there was an incident where there was some prison riots.
Okay.
And basically the prisoners, took control of the prisons. And in Brazil, again, crime is very much in the hands of gangs. And therefore, when these prison riots happened, it just depended on which gang got control of the prison.
Wow.
And how can we put this? If you're eating something right now, put it down.
Okay.
They literally butchered people.
Oof.
I have seen pictures from inside some of those prisons, and it is a vision from hell. That basically just people dismembered. That basically you literally have limbless torsos and legs and arms and whatever piled up somewhere in a corridor.
One suggests that you might need someone with a bit more of an authoritarian bent to bring that slightly under control.
As I say, when you reach levels like that, then perhaps there is a certain amount of understanding as to why one turns towards the strongman. That is still not to say that this Mr. Bolsonaro is a saint. By the sound of it.
Oh, I doubt it very much.
He seems far from someone one would necessarily want running one's country, if you know what I mean. But once you have people chopping others up on a kind of organized scale.
Yeah, inside a government-run institution as well.
Yes, that's when you need to start asking yourself, is something drastic required here?
I mean, I'm no expert on Brazilian politics, but were they particularly left-wing beforehand, or is this they've just been going further right?
Well, they had quite an economic boom, and that meant that they had a lot of wealth to go round and to, if need be, redistribute. And what's he called? Was it Lula?
I seem to recall the only thing about Brazilian politics I can remember is when I was in secondary school doing my A-levels, that the Brazilian they just elected their first female prime minister or something like that a few years ago, but I can't remember.
I think she was the successor to Lula, and Lula now has also ended up in prison, or at least he's ended up convicted, which has then disqualified him from standing, because otherwise I think he would have stood again against Bolsonaro. And Lula would have had a chance of winning. He is still very popular. The poor in particular absolutely adore him. But he didn't seem quite as tainted with corruption as the lady you've just referred to, the one who succeeded him. So there did seem to be a lot of a lot of corruption going on, which invariably there is in a country like Brazil, I'm afraid.
Yes.
Which again, Bolsonaro has basically said that's what I'm going to clamp down on. But I don't think Lula was quite as tainted with that. So he was perhaps understood to be somewhat more authentic than what came afterwards in his own party, if you know what I mean. So yeah, the left may have just cause in complaining that their main man was effectively prevented from standing. But at the same time, had they kept their own house in order, they more than likely wouldn't be in the situation they're in now.
Very true.
And meanwhile, yes, now Bolsonaro has come to power. There are also other questions like environmental questions and whatever, where it looks as if he is just basically going to take the levers off much of the protection for the rainforest and things like that.
Yeah.
Where people kind of think, well, that might not necessarily be a good idea.
Yeah. I suppose we'll have to wait and see. But moving on to the general idea of right-wing populists, such groups have found increasingly a voice in countries from Poland to Thailand to India, their influence coming from ordinary people rather than politicians. God forbid that ordinary people run their own countries. Their rise is a crucial part of the turn towards more conservative politics in many countries around the world over the past few years. Often right-wing populism is seen as being brought about by new political parties or charismatic leaders. Think of Viktor Orban presenting himself as a defender.
I think one has to be very careful with these kind of melanges that are kind of being created by the voices of the left, because I mean, in this case, it's coming from the BBC, so one has to kind of see it through that perspective, because I think there is indeed a kind of right-wing shift.
Yes.
Bolsonaro might be part of that. I am not sure whether Viktor Orban and
Hungary,
the chap that's leading India, the head of the BJP. I'm not sure whether they are the same thing.
Yes.
So Viktor Orban, there is something entirely different going on there.
Well, you know how the left likes to conflate.
Some of it, well, yes, but the right also conflates.
Yes, I was waiting for you to say that.
Orban is being completely embraced by the right, as he's a kind of pucker anti-EU chap, and indeed he is against the EU. He does stand against Soros. He does stand against Soros and things like that. But at the same time, look what he's done to press freedoms in his country. Look what the right wing of his country looks like. When you see some of the sort of far right demonstrations in Hungary, it sends a shiver down your spine. So one has to be careful. At the same time, the BJP in India, which they're sort of referring to, again, that is nationalistic, but it's not just nationalistic, it's also identitarian insofar as that it's for the Hindus. So it's a Hindu majority-led party, and they are the ones who then immediately decided, we'll have to change Bombay to Mumbai and Calcutta to Kolkata and stuff like that. So very much sort of jingoistic nationalism, and very much pro-Hindu, anti-Muslim. Which, of course, in a sort of cauldron, in a religious cauldron like India, is not necessarily very helpful.
Yes.
So one needs to be careful when one reads these articles as to allow them to just throw everyone in the same bucket, if you know what I mean.
Oh yes. Well, you know the media. Nationalist rallies have been held in the center of Kiev. Now, I'm not surprised by this at all. I'm not surprised Kiev is the center of controversy again. Given the whole farce that happened surrounding the previous government, the Crimean Peninsula, and the sort of the general West support of effectively a rebel coup.
Yes, and EU involvement, yes.
Horrendous. So I'm not surprised that they're in a bit of a shambles at the moment, and which has kind of destroyed a lot of their economy, and so you've kind of got these strong figures, as it were, rising from the ashes. But the reality is that the role of grassroots movements is often central. This has been brought about by what is often described as, in quotes, civil society. citizens, groups, or organizations with a particular aim, whether saving a school from closure or overthrowing a regime. For years, civil society has tended to be seen as liberal, supportive of human rights, democratic reform, and the protection of minorities. Often it is these progressive causes that appeal to younger activists. Now, I wonder again whether or not the BBC here is using the American definition of liberal.
Well, it's not only that; it's also it also seems to completely ignore the fact that the West began using what they are referring to here as civil society as a weapon.
Mm.
So, in Russia, for example, suddenly a lot of non-government organizations that seem to be funded by by Western
Interests.
by Western interests suddenly started sprouting out of the ground, and then Putin clamped down on them, only for the West to then howl and say, "Oh well, look how illiberal he is. He is stamping on liberties." And you sort of felt, well, I can see your point, but in basically, in essence, you started it, and it did seem to be a kind of aggressive move, as opposed to these things just emerged organically, if you know what I mean.
Well, they didn't. They emerged as a product of the Second World War and the preceding wars, and obviously the fact that people were sick to death of it all. And
No, I think you misunderstand. With when you're talking about Second World Wars or whatever, I'm talking of stuff that started emerging, after the fall of the Iron Curtain.
oh, okay.
And perhaps around about the days, perhaps even after Yeltsin had lost power and it had been handed over to Putin and whatever, and then suddenly you get dozens of Western organizations setting up in Moscow.
Have we lost the Britisher?
Can you hear me?
Oh, we can hear you now. Yes.
I'm sorry, I don't know why I would have disappeared there.
It was just like this brief period of about 3 seconds of silence.
Okay. No, so suddenly you have got all these organizations setting up in Moscow, very well funded, and funding clearly seeming to be coming from the West. And that's, in a way, when Putin suddenly says, look, hang on,
Enough.
we won't allow this, because it seemed to be a kind of aggressive political move, if you know what I mean.
Well, I don't doubt that it was. It wouldn't surprise me in the slightest. Like, I don't necessarily know whether or not liberals were about the protection of minorities as much as the protections of people. But it's nice of them to chuck that, and so on and so forth. But you just go, yes, there is a broad movement of sort of a resurgence of the right. Again, I would say that that's probably a lot of them are kind of. It takes quite a lot, I think, to get the conservative types off their backsides. So, whilst there will always be far left and far right radicals, trying to make waves in whatever state they're in, I think.
Yeah, I would disagree with you there.
Go on.
I think that, when you say it takes a lot to get the conservative types off their backsides, I don't think it's the conservative types we're talking about. It's really just the centrists. It's the middle, whether it be to the right of that middle or to the left of that middle, that sort of large mainstream in the center. They're very hard to move, whereas the activists on either side. So you can sort of say, oh, left-wing activists, and you're thinking of some student with purple hair and a ring through her nose and whatever. But at the same time, you also think of a right-wing activist standing outside an abortion clinic, screaming her head off. Do you know what I mean? To find fanatical activists on either side is not that difficult.
No, I don't think it is. It's talking about I said conservatives. What I mean is that a large group of people, because the activists are actually a very small proportion. That's what I was getting at.
Yeah, but this is what I mean. That whether you're looking at the conservatives or even social democrats, I think it's very difficult to move that horde.
Yes, absolutely, and so I think that really a lot of people are getting sick of one side getting too big for their boots, at the
Well,
moment.
I would sort of say it's like a super tanker. That basically, you know, it's difficult to move it, but that doesn't mean it's impossible to move it. And it does gradually move.
And
But
when
then once it has moved,
it
it
makes
doesn't immediately just stop there.
it has
So-
momentum.
Yes, so what one is trying to do now is effectively turn this ship around.
In fact, though, I do think we have found the true cause of all the unrest in Brazil.
And what's that?
Batman.
Batman, yes.
Batman.
How silly of me.
Indeed. Billionaires interfering where they shouldn't, you know. What's Adam West doing out there? He doesn't seem to have aged particularly well.
Well, there you go. I think we have it now. You said billionaires. George Soros is Batman.
God, he's more like, I can't even think of an appropriate. I mean, other than the Penguin, he seems a bit more like.
You think he's too old and decrepit, and I just sort of thought, well, could there be a better disguise?
He sloughs off his skin in the evenings like the lizard man that he really is, and dons his Batman costume. You know, very simple. Right. Well, on that note, I think it's about time to end. But I'm going to run through the last few super chats before we go, and then we shall round off. So, Silly Sailor says, if you give up drinking and smoking, you won't live longer. It just seems like longer. Entirely possible as well. A salad fork donated $2 Canadian. Didn't realize that you were allowed your internet in Canada, salad fork, but appreciate donation all the same. It says, we need a final solution to the obesity problem. And then again, salad fork has donated another $2 Canadian and says, we need a final solution to Brazilian crime. I'm starting to sense a trend here, salad fork. And I don't think final solutions are going to be particularly prevalent in real world politics these days. But there you go. Okay, so on that note, it's time to end. Thank you very much for joining me, Mr. Butcher.
It's been an honor, a privilege as usual.
And thanks for dropping in as well, Tailed Feature.
Nay, boher.
Don't you speak Bulgarian to me. Speak like a man. And good night, everybody. Take care.
See you about.